Have you ever wondered why a man who has walked faithfully with God, who prays quietly when no one is watching, could reach 40 and still sleep alone in the same cold bed? Why would heaven allow such devotion to echo through an empty house night after night? Why would a loving God permit the one who trusts him most to wait the longest? These are not random questions, they are divine invitations. Each one is a whisper from heaven, asking you to look deeper than loneliness and recognize that even silence can carry the voice of purpose. This is not just another message or sermon scrolling through your feed. This is a divine interruption, a sacred moment written into your timeline long before you were born. You did not stumble upon this by accident. You were led here because heaven is ready to reveal what delay has been hiding. Right now, the enemy will try to convince you that you've waited too long, that maybe God has moved on to someone else, that your silence means rejection. But that is the oldest lie in the book. Silence is not God's absence. It is his strategy. It is the sacred furnace where character is forged and calling is purified. Listen carefully. The years you call empty are not wasted. They are the soil where your next season will grow. Every unanswered prayer, every night you stared at the ceiling asking why, every morning you got up and kept believing anyway. He saw it all. Heaven has never been blind to your faithfulness. You may think you've been forgotten, but you have actually been preserved. You are not behind schedule. You are in divine timing. God's preparation always takes longer than human expectation because what he builds is meant to last. As C.S.Lewis wrote in Mere Christianity, God is not hurried along in the time stream of this universe any more than an author is hurried along in the imaginary time of his own novel. This truth reminds us that God's timing operates beyond our impatience, crafting an eternal purpose in the quiet of our waiting. So before you go any further, make this moment an altar. Whisper it aloud or write it if you must. I still trust his timing. Those 5 words shift the atmosphere. They open heaven's gate over a waiting heart. Trust is the seed that grows even in drought. And if you stay until the end of this message, you will see what few men ever see: the purpose that hides behind prolonged solitude. Don't rush away from what heaven is doing. Don't let distraction rob you of revelation. What you are about to read next is not simply a story, it is a mirror. Through it, you will recognize how God moves in seasons of silence, how he shapes destiny in the quiet hills of waiting. And that story begins with a man named Caleb. Caleb lived in the hill country of Arad, a land of quiet vineyards and patient seasons. He was known as a man of steady hands and an honest heart, faithful in work, faithful in prayer, faithful in his silence. Yet, behind his calm eyes was a story most men would never see. Years ago, he had been engaged to Miriam, the daughter of a local elder, whose laughter once filled his every dream. But on the eve of their wedding, Miriam vanished with a traveling merchant, taking with her not only the dowry that bore his family's name, but the confidence that once anchored his soul. That night, something inside Caleb died, not his faith, but his expectation of love. He buried himself in labor, plowing the fields by day and praying through clenched teeth at night. When people asked why he never married, he would only say, "The Lord is still writing my chapter." Few understood that those words were not resignation but survival. Years passed. Then one evening, during a storm that broke open the valley, Caleb found a young woman collapsed by the roadside. Her name was Rebecca. She was soft-spoken, scarred by hardship, yet carried a light that pierced the coldness he had worn like armor. Over time, Rebecca's laughter returned warmth to his home. She sang as she baked bread and prayed as she mended clothes. For the first time in years, Caleb felt the stirring of hope, a sense that perhaps God had not forgotten his heart. But one morning, as dawn poured through the window, Rebecca came to him trembling. "I must tell you something," she said. "My husband is still alive. I was abandoned, not widowed. I thought I was free, but I am not. I cannot stay." Her voice broke, and so did his. She left before sunset, leaving behind only a folded cloth and a note that read, "God's plans often break us only to remake us." Caleb fell to his knees, his fists pressed into the floor. For the first time, he did not ask why, he asked for what purpose, and in that question, heaven finally had room to speak. Days turned into weeks. Then a messenger arrived from the nearby village. A plague had struck, leaving a dozen children orphaned. Caleb opened his door and said only, "Bring them." The house that once echoed with loneliness became a refuge of laughter and prayer. The man once wounded by love became a father to those who had none. The people began to call him Father Caleb, and when they did, something sacred stirred within him. He realized that what he had seen as God's rejection had been God's redirection. His solitude had not been a sentence, it had been training. If he had married when he wanted, he would have never been ready to love in the way heaven required. In the evenings, when the children were asleep, Caleb would sit outside and watch the stars rise over Arad. The same silence that once tormented him now wrapped around him like a mantle of peace. He no longer saw an empty home, he saw an altar. He no longer saw delay, he saw divine preparation. And in that quiet hill country, heaven whispered to him what every waiting soul must one day understand. God does not waste waiting. When the dust of grief finally settled, Caleb began to see what he could not see before. That silence was not punishment, it was surgery. God had not removed people from his life to leave him empty. He had cleared the space so that love could grow wider than blood, deeper than romance, and purer than need. The house that once symbolized shame now stood as a sanctuary. The children who once feared the night learned to pray before sleep, their voices weaving through the air like incense. Each dawn, Caleb would rise before the sun, kneel beside the window and whisper, "Thank you for trusting me with this season." There was no music, no applause, no woman to touch his face, but there was peace, the kind that does not come from being understood, but from being aligned. He finally grasped that holiness is not found in being surrounded by many, but in being seen by one. As C.S.Lewis wrote in The Four Loves, "To love at all is to be vulnerable. Love anything, and your heart will be wrung and possibly broken." This truth underscores that Caleb's broken heart, shaped by loss, became the vessel for a love that extended beyond romance to a divine calling. As the years moved forward, the transformation became visible to all. His hands, once calloused from tilling soil for survival, now carried children with gentleness. His words, once weighed down by disappointment, became healing for others. Young men came to him seeking counsel, and widows left baskets of bread at his door, whispering blessings as they walked away. Caleb's solitude had turned into ministry. His pain had become the platform where heaven could speak. And yet, deep within, he understood something profound. God does not elevate without first isolating. Every man who is meant to lead must first be hidden. Every calling that is meant to last must first be carved in silence. Caleb's story was not the tragedy of a man left behind, but the training of a man destined to build something eternal. One evening, as he watched the children chase each other across the field, he felt the gentle voice of the Spirit rise inside him. "This was never about what you lost. It was about what I was building inside you." Tears fell, not of sorrow but of realization. He finally saw the truth. The years that looked like delay were actually designed. The loneliness that once broke him had become the furnace where his purpose was forged. What began as isolation had become intercession. What began as waiting had become witness. From that night on, Caleb no longer prayed for someone to fill his empty space. He prayed for God to fill others through his surrendered heart, and heaven answered. Now, the story no longer belongs only to Caleb. It belongs to every man who has looked at the ceiling at 2 a.m. and whispered, "Lord, have you forgotten me?" It belongs to every heart that kept serving, giving, believing, yet still felt unseen. Caleb's journey is not just a tale from a distant land. It is a mirror held up to your own soul. Maybe you too have buried dreams you once prayed for. Maybe you have watched people receive what you've long desired: marriage, companionship, a family, and wondered if heaven somehow skipped over your name. But let this truth settle in your spirit. God never skips over his faithful. He sequences them. He delays what is temporary so he can reveal what is eternal. Like Caleb, you have been hidden, not rejected. The delay you call disappointment is heaven's strategy to deepen your roots before the next storm. The silence that feels unbearable is not abandonment. It is divine protection from noise that could derail your calling. You are not behind, you are being refined. You are not forgotten, you are being formed. Think about this: every man God ever trusted with great influence first walked through seasons of obscurity. Moses in Midian, David in the wilderness, John the Baptist in the desert. Even Jesus himself, 30 silent years before 3 years of ministry. Heaven hides what it values. What looks like absence is often preservation. So don't curse your cave, consecrate it. Don't resent your solitude, redeem it. Let the quiet room become your classroom. Let the stillness train your hearing until you can distinguish the whisper of God from the noise of men. Every unanswered prayer is not a denial, it is a direction. Every delay is not a punishment, it is preparation. If you can embrace this truth, you will discover what Caleb discovered on that hill, that isolation is not the enemy of purpose, it is the womb of it. The silence you hate is shaping the voice you'll one day carry. The loneliness that haunts you is birthing the compassion you'll one day pour out. This is not the end of your story, it is the shaping of it. And just as God transformed Caleb's empty house into a refuge of laughter, he will turn your silent season into a testimony that will heal others. From Genesis to Revelation, the same divine rhythm repeats itself. Isolation before revelation, hiddenness before calling. God never elevates a man he has not first separated. Every story that carried the fragrance of heaven began in silence. Look at the prophets and the apostles, at the men who became voices in their generations. Each of them walked through the valley of being unseen. Jeremiah was called to speak for God, but forbidden to marry or build a home. The Lord told him, "You shall not take a wife, nor shall you have sons or daughters in this place." Jeremiah 16:2. Why? Because his assignment required a heart that would not be divided between God's word and the world's noise. His solitude became his shield. Every tear he cried for a nation that would not listen was proof that isolation was not punishment but preparation. John the Baptist thundered from the wilderness, clothed in rough garments, eating locusts and honey. His ministry did not begin in the temple or the city, but in the desert. Before he became a voice crying out, he had to become a man who could endure silence. The desert stripped him of everything unnecessary so that when he finally spoke, his words carried the weight of heaven. Then there was Paul, educated, brilliant, and zealous, yet after encountering Christ, he did not rush to preach. He spent years in Arabia, alone with the Spirit, until revelation replaced ambition. Only then could he write with authority words that would shape the church for millennia. Even Jesus, the Son of God, lived 30 quiet years before 3 years of ministry. The Savior of the world chose obscurity so that obedience could mature in silence. Do you see the pattern? God hides what he treasures. He shelters what he intends to display. When you feel buried, you are not forgotten, you are planted. The soil that covers you is the same ground that will one day announce your growth. Heaven's timeline never bends to human impatience. The delay you despise is often the doorway to your destiny. If Jeremiah had not endured loneliness, he would not have heard God's voice. If John had not embraced the wilderness, he would not have become the messenger. If Paul had not disappeared into Arabia, his words would still burn centuries later. And if Jesus himself waited until heaven said, "Now, who are we to demand sooner?" Your silence is sacred. It is the same silence that birthed prophets, apostles, and kings. In it, God is not withholding, he is refining. The question is no longer why you are waiting, but what heaven is building in you while you wait. And when the time comes, that silence will explode into purpose just as surely as dawn follows night. Even modern science now echoes what Scripture declared long ago: solitude, when embraced with purpose, becomes strength. Psychologists call it intentional isolation. Heaven calls it preparation. In recent decades, researchers have discovered that extended solitude, far from breaking the mind, can actually rebuild it. Studies from Harvard and Stanford have shown that people who practice consistent solitude develop deeper emotional intelligence, clearer decision-making, and stronger self-regulation. They are less reactive, more reflective, and capable of longer-term vision. In other words, silence trains the brain for endurance, the same endurance that faith requires. Men who live alone are often misunderstood by the world. Culture sees singleness after 40 as failure, but data tells another story. A 2022 meta-analysis on emotional development revealed that individuals who spend seasons of deep solitude often emerge with higher empathy and creative problem-solving skills. They think differently because they have had to listen differently. They create meaning from within, not from applause. It is as if God wired the human brain to mirror his method to form power in hiddenness. In the same way roots grow deeper in darkness before a tree rises, the mind of a man grows stronger in silence before he stands before others. Even the physical body bears witness. Research on neuroplasticity and meditation has found that quiet reflection strengthens neural pathways connected to self-control and compassion. The Apostle Paul called it renewing of the mind. Science now calls it rewiring. What both describe is the same mystery. Solitude, when aligned with faith, becomes transformation. It is not the absence of connection, it is the refinement of it. When a man spends time alone with God, his nervous system calms, his cortisol lowers, his attention sharpens. Heaven designed the human frame to thrive when its spirit is at rest. The world fears silence because it cannot monetize it, but heaven sanctifies it because it is where voices are born. Every leader, artist, or visionary who truly changed history carried a season of seclusion, not because they were abandoned, but because clarity requires distance. It was in isolation that Newton wrote the laws of motion, that Lincoln formed his resolve, that prophets heard the whisper of eternity. The principle never changed. Revelation follows retreat. So when you find yourself walking through long corridors of quiet, understand that God is not ignoring you, he is aligning you. The same creator who hid his greatest work for 6 silent days before saying, "Let there be light," is now shaping your inner world in ways science is only beginning to describe. Every day you endure the stillness with faith. You are not losing ground, you are gaining depth. And one day soon, when the time is right, both heaven and earth will witness the strength born from your silence. There comes a moment in every believer's life when silence stops feeling like a void and starts feeling like a presence. That is the moment when solitude becomes sacred ground. Caleb reached that threshold without realizing it. What had begun as loneliness had quietly transformed into communion. The same quiet nights that once taunted him now pulsed with something holy, as though heaven itself had moved into the empty corners of his house. He began to see that every unanswered prayer was not an absence of God's voice, but a different kind of conversation. The silence itself was the voice, the unspoken lesson teaching him to trust what he could not yet see. When he knelt in that stillness, he realized that solitude is not a punishment for the unworthy. It is a privilege for the chosen. It is where God turns the human heart into an altar, stripping away distractions until only devotion remains. Caleb's altar was not made of stone or fire. It was built from surrender. Each time he said yes to the season he did not choose, he laid another brick. Each time he forgave those who never returned, another beam of faith rose toward heaven. Over time, that invisible altar became the most powerful place in his world. From there, he prayed prayers that shaped lives beyond his own. From there, he interceded for the broken, the forgotten, the lost, because he knew what it felt like to be all three. In the silence, he found the heart of God. He discovered that the same voice that speaks through thunder can also whisper through stillness. The same God who shakes mountains also sits beside the lonely in the dark. And when he looked around, he realized that the emptiness had changed, not because it was filled with people, but because it was filled with presence. This is the mystery most never understand. The place you dread can become the place of your destiny. The room you once called prison can become your temple. The quiet that once frightened you can become your teacher. Silence is not a void, it is a visitation. It is where God molds the unseen before revealing it to the world. So if you find yourself in that place now, waiting, aching, wondering, know this: heaven is nearer than it feels. Every sigh is heard, every tear is recorded. And one day you will look back and realize that the silence you survived was actually the altar where God made you whole. Years after Caleb's story faded into legend, a man named Ethan would unknowingly retrace his steps. Ethan was 43, a successful architect who had built cathedrals for others but could not escape the hollow echo of his own empty apartment. He had spent years chasing excellence, discipline, and faithfulness. Yet at night, when the lights dimmed and the world went silent, the same question returned: God, when is it my turn? Ethan was not a bitter man, but he was tired. Church members called him dependable, colleagues called him steady, but none saw the quiet ache behind his composure. He had proposed once, years earlier, but life unraveled, and he decided never to open his heart again. He poured himself into work and service, yet something sacred in him remained waiting. Then, one winter evening, his pastor asked him to temporarily teach a Sunday class for teenagers who had lost their fathers. Ethan almost refused. He told himself he was too busy, that he wasn't the right fit. But something deep inside whispered, "This is the door." Reluctantly, he stepped through it. The first session felt awkward, restless teens, distracted hearts, but one boy, Marcus, stayed behind after class. "You talk like my dad used to," the boy said. That sentence pierced something Ethan didn't know was still alive. The following week, more boys stayed. Within months, that small class had become a gathering of young men learning discipline, faith, and hope under Ethan's guidance. He began to realize that his years of silence had not been wasted. They had been training. God had not withheld family from him, he had expanded it. Over the next decade, Ethan founded an organization called Fathers Without Sons. It grew into a network of mentorship programs, scholarships, and homes for young men who had lost their direction. Reporters once asked him why he started it. He smiled and answered softly, "Because I know what it feels like to wait for someone who never comes, and I know now that God used that waiting to make me the one who shows up." Ethan's life became living proof of what Caleb's story had whispered generations earlier, that God never wastes waiting. Solitude, when surrendered, becomes service. Pain, when yielded, becomes purpose. The man who once prayed for one family became a father to hundreds. His story was not about what he lost, but what heaven built through his endurance. And when people called him Father Ethan, he would pause, eyes lifted slightly, as if listening for an echo from above, because he knew, in that sacred silence, that the same God who transformed Caleb's loneliness into legacy had done it again in a different century, in a different man, but with the same holy pattern. Now, the story turns from observation to invitation. What began as Caleb's revelation and Ethan's witness now reaches you. This is not a tale to admire from a distance. It is a summons to respond. Every truth demands an altar, and this is yours. Right where you are, perhaps in a quiet room, perhaps at the end of another long day, heaven leans close, waiting for your answer. Close your eyes for a moment. Breathe. Let every voice that accuses you of being behind fall silent. The God who sculpted worlds out of nothing is the same God who has been shaping you in the unseen. His timing has never been late, only deliberate. What feels like a delay to you is designed for him. You have not been overlooked. You have been under construction. You have not been bypassed. You have been built. Pray these words slowly, not as poetry but as a covenant. Father, I surrender this season of silence to you. I give you my waiting, my loneliness, my ache for what I do not yet see. Forgive me for mistaking your preparation for punishment. Teach me to trust that your plans are never random. If you have withheld something, it is because you are preparing me for something greater. Refine my heart, Lord, until I can love without conditions and serve without recognition. Use my solitude as the soil for compassion. Make me a father, a mentor, a refuge to those who have none. Turn my house into a sanctuary and my silence into a song. I receive this waiting not as a delay, but as divine training. And when your appointed time comes, let my life testify that you never waste pain, you never waste years, and you never waste faith. Let the stillness linger. Heaven hears what you just said. You have not merely spoken words, you have shifted realms. Angels record moments like these, the instant when a weary soul stops wrestling and starts trusting. You are no longer the same person who began this message. You are no longer standing in the middle of your waiting. You are standing on holy ground. Now hear this commissioning. The Lord will not let the tears you've cried in private go unredeemed. He will multiply them into empathy, wisdom, and power. He will send people your way who carry the same ache you once endured, and you will speak to them not with theory, but with authority. What once wounded you will become your weapon. The solitude that shaped you will now sustain others. This is your divine appointment. The silence has done its work. The waiting has borne its fruit. Now rise not with noise, but with peace, and carry this truth wherever you go. God never forgets the ones he refines the longest. This is the moment where everything converges: the story, the silence, the waiting, the ache, and the prayer. Everything that once felt scattered now finds its meaning. Every unanswered question has been leading here to one unshakable truth. You were never forgotten. You were hidden for purpose, preserved for power, and prepared for impact. You stand now where Caleb once stood, where Ethan once wept, where every chosen soul eventually arrives between what was and what will be. Heaven has heard your surrender. The years that seemed empty have already been written into the architecture of your calling. The God who formed galaxies in darkness has been forming your destiny in silence. You are not behind. You are right on time. Listen carefully. The world measures worth by applause, achievement, and visible fruit, but heaven measures it by obedience. What others call waiting, heaven calls refining. What others call delay, heaven calls design. You are a living testimony that time spent with God is never wasted. Your solitude was never a tomb, it was a womb. Out of it is being born new strength, new clarity, and new authority. Now speak these words not timidly, but as one who has walked through fire and emerged with purpose. I am not defined by what I lack, but by who I carry. My solitude is not weakness, it is power. My silence is not emptiness, it is the echo of heaven preparing to speak. I am not waiting to be chosen, I was chosen to wait. And I will no longer see delay as denial, because in every hidden season, God was building me. Let these words settle deep into your spirit. Let them anchor you when the nights grow long again, when silence returns, when doubt whispers that you have missed your moment. Now you know the truth. Waiting is not a valley to escape, but a temple to inhabit. It is the place where heaven trains the ones it trusts. The very thing you thought would break you has become the thing that made you unshakable. The same God who turned Caleb's isolation into a legacy and Ethan's silence into service is turning your season into testimony. You will not merely survive this waiting, you will steward it. You will not just endure, you will multiply. The wisdom forged in your quiet years will one day guide others out of their own darkness. So rise and step into your next chapter with your head lifted high. You are no longer who you were when this began. You have become what heaven intended, a vessel refined, a voice prepared, a witness to the truth that God never forgets, never wastes, and never fails. Carry this truth wherever you go, and when silence visits again, do not fear it. Smile, because now you know it is not the end of your story. It is the beginning of your purpose.